About 2 years ago, I bought this laptop which, well, frankly, was just overpriced. I could have spent a fraction of the cost on a laptop with the same or even better CPU and comparable features. But at the end of my review of it, I came away saying I am extremely happy with this purchase, which might not make much sense unless you're familiar with Framework laptops. A few years ago, Framework set out on a mission to build systems that are designed from the ground up to be repairable, upgradable, and reusable. So what that meant for me was that while I was initially paying more for a somewhat average laptop, I'd eventually reap the benefits of being able to easily and affordably repair my laptop if needed, and also upgrade the components that I want in the future, rather than having to pay for an entirely new system. But even on a channel like mine, where I pretty heavily focus on repairing and reusing hardware, I had naysayers in the comments calling this a joke or a gimmick. Were they right? Well, I think not, because this old motherboard and display used to be in my laptop, but they aren't anymore because I replaced them both in like 20 minutes. So now, not only do I have a faster and more efficient laptop with a much better display, I have components that I can use for other projects, and not in like incredibly difficult, hacky, YouTuber-only ways. Repurposing parts like this motherboard, for example, should be relatively simple. I mean, you can literally just go buy a case for it right now on Framework's website. But because Framework has made a lot of their documentation public, there are tons of 3D printable projects out there, from simple cases to server clusters. Heck, people have even turned these into full-fledged gaming handhelds. Now, we're not going to go that far today, and I'm also not going to dive into how to repurpose this screen, although it is definitely doable. Actually, I have a pretty cool project idea that I'll cover in a future video, so maybe get subscribed. Today, I want to briefly talk about the upgrade process and my current thoughts on this laptop, and I also want to see just how easy it is to repurpose this original mainboard. Maybe we can see how well it'll work as a home server, a media PC, or just a simple desktop machine. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot here about my thoughts and experiences with the Framework 13. If you're curious, you can go watch my original video. Now, there was one thing that I didn't do a great job of acknowledging in that video, which was why I bought a 13th gen Intel system rather than an AMD one. A lot of my complaints with the Framework 13 had to do with the battery life, which would have been a lot better had I gone with the AMD platform. However, when I bought mine, well, there weren't any AMD systems available. I really needed a laptop though, and since then I was really only using it for emails and writing scripts when I just needed to get out of the house for a bit, I didn't really need much. So yes, picking the Intel platform versus AMD probably wasn't the best decision, but it was the option I had, and for the review video, it was the laptop that I had in front of me and could review. Now, recently, I've started using my laptop quite a bit more, and here in a few months, it's probably going to be used more extensively in my YouTube workflow. So I wanted to get something that would have a bit more performance and also help with my battery issues. So I opted for a mainboard with the AMD Ryzen 5340. This costs $450, but they also recommend buying the AMD Wi-Fi 7 card, which I did. However, I tested it out with my previous Intel Wi-Fi 6 card, and that seems to work just fine. You also need some DDR5 SODIMM memory, but I already had some on hand, so I opted out. Now, I didn't dislike the original display. It worked fine for most things and actually looked pretty good. But I mostly use my Framework for script writing, and I like to have Notion open in one window so I can actually write my script, and then have like a Firefox window open as well so I can do some research. I do have a portable monitor that I occasionally use, but sometimes it's a bit of a hassle to get it all set up, and so sometimes it's just easier to have my laptop, but I still like to have as much screen real estate as possible. And yes, I know that's why 16-inch laptops exist, but I still prefer to have something smaller for being on the go. So I decided to try out the Framework 2.8K display. This is a pretty decent upgrade from the original in terms of resolution, but it also has a matte finish and a 120Hz refresh rate. That display costs $270, so in total, before tax, I paid around $750 for my upgrades. And like I said, I already had DDR5 on hand, but if I were going to pay for like a 16 gig kit of DDR5, that'd probably cost me like another $50 or so. Now you might be thinking, well, with that kind of money, why not just buy a new laptop? And yeah, I guess I could have. In fact, you can find laptops with the same AMD chip for basically what I paid for just some internals and a display. That being said though, had I gone with one of those cheaper laptops, I would have had a much worse screen and probably a worse build quality. I also wouldn't have the same peace of mind knowing just how easy and affordable it is to fix my laptop, which I live in a house with a toddler, so that's pretty nice. Now, to be clear, I could have just kept the original screen and also not bought that Wi-Fi card and only spent $450, so there's still that. So all in all, I'm pretty happy with my purchase. And because I bought a Framework in the first place, I have this cool motherboard that I can do something cool with. Now, regardless of what laptop you use or what little mainboards you want to repurpose, you're going to need some USB power. And boy, do I have plenty of it thanks to this Nexode 300 watt power bank from today's sponsor, UGREEN. This thing is nuts, with a massive 48,000 mAh capacity that can completely charge an iPhone 15 Pro over 9 times. It's perfect for family road trips, outdoor activities, on-location shoots, or just people like me that, well, I need a big battery because I typically forget to charge them. Now, speaking of charging, this thing can charge itself back up in just an hour and a half, thanks to its 140 watt bidirectional charging. It has 5 different ports, so you can charge all of your devices simultaneously. One of the USB-C ports can deliver up to 140 watts, and altogether it can deliver up to 300 watts of total output. It also comes with some nice-to-haves like a carry handle, non-slip feet on multiple sides, as well as this really nice matte LED display that shows remaining battery, as well as the input and output power. Oh yeah, and it also includes this handy LED light with 3 different modes. And with its automotive-grade lithium iron phosphate batteries, the Nexode 300 watt power bank will have a much longer lifespan than traditional power banks. So if you're like me and you enjoy your devices charged, consider picking up a UGREEN Nexode 300 watt power bank by using my link down in the description. The process of swapping everything out was incredibly easy thanks to Framework's design and the provided guides. To get inside the Framework 13, all you have to do is loosen 5 screws on the bottom, and then remove the input cover, which is attached with just a single cable. There are a few cables to unplug from the mainboard, as well as just a few more screws, but they all use the same Torx T5 bit. After getting the previous board out, I reversed the process to install the new board that, well, I definitely didn't drop. Like I said, the process was really easy, and by far the hardest part was just trying to tidy up the cables for the Wi-Fi card. Swapping out the display was even easier. The screen bezel is magnetic, so it just pops off, and then all you have to do is remove a few more screws and unplug a single cable. Once again, I just reversed the process to get the new display installed, and literally within just a few minutes, I had what felt like a brand new laptop. I've been using Fedora 42 for a few weeks now, and while it definitely never felt slow with that 13th Gen i5, I did notice that it was now just ever so slightly snappier, which actually caught me off guard. I did not expect any noticeable difference in basic usage. The battery life has been, well, a little bit better, but it would probably be a lot better if I switched from 120 Hz back to 60 Hz, but I really like 120 Hz. The display looks great though, and I'm able to fit a lot more content on screen without noticing that text is getting fuzzy or anything. Now there is one weird quirk with this display, which is that the corners are rounded. And Framework was very transparent about this. It was just something they had to deal with how they were able to source these displays in a cost-effective manner. I didn't think it would bother me in the slightest, but, well, it has. And it's not so much that the corners are rounded off so much as that it's just the top corners that are rounded. The bottom ones are a bit more squared off. I feel like it would help my brain a little bit if they were the same, but I'm sure I'll just stop noticing it all here soon enough. But yeah, overall, I am really happy with my new, but not new laptop, but this isn't really what I wanted to talk about today. What I really wanted to talk about was what we could do with this. Now, obviously I can't cover every single motherboard that Framework has produced. I only have this one, and I guess the one that I just put in my laptop that I'm not gonna take out. So yeah, really, I only have this one. All of the Framework 13 boards have essentially the same design though, which is pretty simple. There's obviously the CPU and the heatsink, as well as 2 SODIMM sockets. There's just a single M.2 NVMe socket for an SSD, but there's also an M.2 E key slot for a Wi-Fi card, but you could repurpose this for something else. You also get 4 USB-C ports that are used for the little Framework expansion modules, and the protocols on these somewhat vary depending on the model. There's also a teeny tiny little power button on the board because, well, unlike most other laptop boards, this was designed to be usable outside of the laptop chassis. So like I said earlier, you could spend $40 on this Cooler Master case, or you could just 3D print something. Framework themselves actually produced a model that's available for download, but there are tons of community models available. As I mentioned earlier, there's literally a case you can print off and turn your old motherboard into essentially a Steam Deck. But I also found some cool NAS cases, I found this design to build a cluster, which is just nuts, and there are so many other cool designs, but I decided to keep things simple and I settled on this design here. This is just an improved version of the original Framework design, but with better airflow and fewer parts. Most likely, I'm just going to repurpose this as a little living room entertainment PC or something along those lines, so something simple is probably ideal. Also, for now, this gives me sort of a test bench so that I can try some different things out. I didn't have any issues printing off the case, and getting the motherboard installed was dead simple. I also love that this little power button has such a nice, satisfying click. I did notice one issue though after I printed this case, which is that, well, this has room for the Framework expansion card slots, but I don't have any extras. I only have the 4 that are in my laptop, so I'll just have to steal those for now, but in the long term, I might just have to find or design a case that trims these off so that I can just use the built-in USB-C ports. Now, speaking of USB, I know a lot of you are probably already just a little bit concerned. Relying on USB for I/O as well as power is totally fine for most use cases, but it might raise some concerns if you're looking to run this as a server of sorts. While USB power delivery is pretty awesome, I still feel just a little bit weird using it for something that I need to reliably run 24/7, but I don't know, I guess a ton of people use things like Raspberry Pis that are powered over USB, so maybe it's just not that big of a deal. But only having USB does mean that you're going to need adapters for stuff, like Ethernet. You could use some of those framework expansion cards I mentioned to clean things up, like this 2.5 gig card for example, but if you want more options, you'll probably just end up with some cables and dongles kind of hanging out the side. That being said, we do still have some PCIe available through those M.2 slots, but well, you'd have to get a bit creative to leverage those. I'm getting tired of blabbering on about this, I'm sure you are as well, so let's see what this little motherboard can actually do. Alright, so I'm over here at my little workbench. I have the framework mainboard here in half of this case. I didn't put the top on just so it's easier to work in. Then I also have just a little USB hub for HDMI output, as well as USB for my keyboard. And then I have another USB cable that's plugged into a 100-watt power brick for power. So let's go ahead and plug that in. And when we do this, we'll probably get some lights. And these are just because there's a little switch here that if I do that, it'll look all normal. But if I lift up on this switch, then it's going to give these little warning lights because it's not inside the case, but we'll be able to fix that. So there's a little power button right up here. It's really hard to see, but I'm going to hit that. And this should give us a post here. Oh, I didn't get the little pop-up. I'm just going to reboot real quick. All right, there we go. So if you don't hit the UEFI hotkey, you'll get this little message on the screen. Basically, you can change this standalone operation to enabled, which means that the motherboard's expecting to run in just a standalone case, not in the laptop case. So we'll switch that to enabled and then hit OK. And here, if we go to the setup utility, we can also see under the advanced tab that there's this standalone operation enabled. So you could just enable that setting before you ever take it out of the laptop. That way you don't get that little warning. So everything should be good to go. But if you notice, it says my date is January 1st, 2023. And I think I know why. This mainboard does have a little CMOS battery socket, but when you buy the laptop, it's actually not populated because it's not needed because, well, the laptop would have its own battery, I believe. So I think I'm going to try to pop a battery in here to see if that fixes our real-time clock issue, which this is a CR1220 battery. So I'm just gonna try popping that in there. All right, so I've got the date set. I'm gonna hit F10 to save, and we're gonna see if this gets retained. Hey, there we go. Okay, cool. So that actually seems to work. Earlier when I did this, just testing out a little bit before I filmed, that date did not stay the same. So that's good. All right, let's actually do something with this system. I'm gonna drop in a little NVMe SSD really quick. Then I'm gonna grab a Proxmox installer. Let's install Proxmox. All right, so I've got Proxmox installed and running. I got everything updated and it's doing just fine. I ran PowerTop AutoTune and the Auto ASPM script, and after doing that, the idle power draw dropped to around like 6 or 7, 8 watts, somewhere around there at idle. After that, I ran some of the community scripts to get Jellyfin and Home Assistant installed. Home Assistant is running great. In Jellyfin, everything was working good. I was able to get hardware accelerated transcoding working. And with that 13th gen Intel chip, QuickSync performance is gonna be pretty good. So if you're gonna use this as like a Plex or Jellyfin server, that should work pretty well. But this is a little bit boring and basic. It's just a little motherboard with an SSD and we're still running networking off of USB. So what if we wanted to spice things up a little bit? Well, we do have more USB ports that we could use. And we also have this M.2 E key slot. So I'm actually gonna shut the system down really quick. All right, so with this shut down, we can now plug something into this little M.2 E key socket, and we could put another Wi-Fi card back in, but that would be boring. We could also grab like a 2.5 gig adapter or something, but I actually have this M.2 E key to M.2 M key adapter, and then plugged into there, I have this little ASM 1166 6-port SATA adapter. So we could drop this in real quick. We'll find a place for that somewhere. All right, whatever. Let's just turn this thing on. All right, cool, so it's up and running. This is plugged in, and if I run LSPCI, I can see down here at the bottom that we have our AS Media ASM 1166 SATA controller. And if I run LSPCI-VV, We can see that we're obviously downgraded to 1 lane of PCIe just because we're on an M.2 key socket, but we are running at PCIe Gen 3. So that's still like around like 8 gigabits per second or so. So unless you're running like 10 gig off of this, this isn't really going to be a bottleneck if you did want to hook up like 6 hard drives to this and turn it into an interesting little NAS. In fact, earlier I mentioned a project for a 3D printable NAS case for these framework boards, and I'm pretty sure that uses basically this exact same setup with a little M.2 key to N key extension, and then this ASM1166 adapter. Now, obviously you will need a way to power any hard drives, and the solution that I think they used for that case was to use these cool little like dummy USB power delivery plugs. So it basically requests 5 volts USB power delivery, but then converts that just into like a direct 5 volts that you can just solder some wires to and have 5 volts for some 2.5-inch hard drives or SATA SSDs. Now, I mentioned doing some faster networking, and one thing I thought to do was move the NVMe SSD over to a USB adapter, or you could even just buy one of those framework modules with like a little 250 gig SSD for a boot drive, plug that in, use that, and then now you have this M.2 socket available for, you know, if you wanted to add a little SATA adapter. Or my thought was you could keep the hard drives on the M.2 key socket and then use this 5 gig M.2 adapter that I have. But I realized the USB adapter I was going to use for the NVMe, I let someone borrow it, so I don't have it. So instead we're going to keep that SSD there, and I have a little 5 gig UGREEN adapter that I'm going to hook up. All right, so I have this 5 gig adapter plugged into my QNAP switch, which supports like 2.5 gig, 5 gig, 10 gig. And over here in Proxmox, we have our 2 network adapters. I'm just going to change this here to, instead of being, oh gosh, these are so long, I'm gonna have to copy paste. I'm just gonna paste that bridge port in, hit OK. Then we'll hit apply configuration. Hopefully nothing breaks. Okay, it appears to be working. I think I'm actually just going to unplug this adapter entirely. Oh, it just died. It just turned off. Oh, I unplugged the power. Oops. All right, so I actually had to go back and just plug in the gigabit USB-C interface. That way I could put this other one on a separate subnet. That way I could actually like test it, but I can confirm in iPerf3 that we're actually getting 5 gigabit or pretty close to it over this USB adapter. So that's pretty cool. Not exactly what I had planned. I was hoping to use some more of the NVMe stuff, but yeah, this is kind of janky. It's kind of a mess. You would definitely have to kind of figure out the case situation. Whether you printed or bought one, you might have to like cut something out, or you could find some cool cases like that NAS case I mentioned if you wanted to get a little bit hacky. I think I mentioned this already, but I don't plan on using this as any sort of server or anything. I'm actually going to probably put this in my living room and be our new media PC essentially. And so I actually designed and printed off a slightly modified version of this modified version of the case. But basically it just gets rid of those USB-C expansion port things and trims them off so the case ends up being a little bit shorter. Here, I'll go ahead and cut the power here. Yeah, so as you can see, this motherboard still fits in here just fine, but it's substantially shorter than the other case just because it doesn't have those little USB module things. And then the lid can just pop on and snap in place. And yeah, this whole thing actually can print in just, well, 2 pieces, the top and bottom, on my Bamboo Lab X1C since it's a little bit shorter. But yeah, this is probably what this PC is actually going to live in, and I'm probably just gonna hide it in my living room. And like I said, I don't really need those modules because realistically, I'm probably going to hook up one USB hub that's gonna be for power, HDMI, and network, all just on one port. That way the cabling can kind of be a little bit tidier. But that is the framework main board that came out of my framework laptop, which is still working. It's just with the new main board, and I think that's pretty cool and worth talking about. I do realize these are expensive. You're definitely paying a premium to get some of these features, but I still think it's a really cool thing that they're doing, and I'm happy to throw my money their way. And once again, I think they're still really cool products. I also have that display that, like I said earlier, I think I have a cool idea for what I want to do with that. So if you're interested, maybe consider getting subscribed if you're not already, and just stay tuned for it. Hopefully I'll get around to it here in a few weeks, we'll see. But yeah, that's about it for this one. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Stay curious, and I really can't wait to see you in the next one.